On a day that will go down in history as one of the most turbulent in recent American politics, the United States Supreme Court, with its predominantly conservative composition, stunned the world by unanimously endorsing a decision that undermined the foundations of the legal empire built by Donald J. Trump over years of relentless judicial battles. It was November 2025, and what began as a routine petition on presidential immunity turned into an earthquake that shook the foundations of the Republican Party and left the former president, now a candidate for re-election, isolated in his Mar-a-Lago tower. The 9 justices, including those appointed by Trump himself, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, voted in unison to reject the doctrine of absolute immunity that Trump so fiercely defended in pending cases related to January 6th and the 2020 elections. This maneuver, seen by analysts as a devastating calculated move to preserve the integrity of the judicial institution above partisan loyalties, not only invalidated crucial appeals, but also opened the floodgates to a torrent of civil and criminal proceedings that loomed like dark clouds over the political horizon. Trump, in a fiery speech broadcast live to millions of loyal followers, called the decision a witch hunt orchestrated by Democrats infiltrated in the heart of American justice. But behind the curtains of furious rhetoric, his closest advisors whispered about the panic settling in the corridors of the legal team he had long touted as invincible.
Sidney Powell, the gray-haired lawyer with unshakable convictions, who once proclaimed, "Freedom is not enough, we're going to release the Kraken," was the first to jump ship. In a resignation letter released to the press in the late afternoon, Powell cited irreconcilable differences with the strategic direction post-court decision and expressed ethical concerns about the viability of continuing to defend theses that now seemed doomed to failure.
Her departure was not a discreet whisper, but a roar that echoed through the halls of Washington, where Republican lobbyists and donors began questioning whether the investment in Trump was worth the risk of total collapse. Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani, the former New York mayor who had transformed into Trump's personal pit bull, faced the dilemma of his life. Already mired in his own legal troubles, including a defamation trial that had left him on the brink of bankruptcy, Giuliani hesitated in public, but internal sources reveal he spent hours on the phone with allies in the Capitol, weighing the pros and cons of abandoning the ship before it sank for good. The Supreme Court's decision was not just legal, it was a punch in the gut to the Trumpist narrative that the system was rigged against him, and now, ironically, even the judges he had placed on the bench seemed to turn their backs. Behind the scenes, junior lawyers on Trump's team exchanged messages in encrypted groups, expressing fear of professional sanctions for association with what many saw as a lost cause. Jenna Ellis, the young lawyer who had once cried in depositions to the January 6th committee, was seen leaving a meeting at Trump Tower with a box of personal files, her pale face contrasting with the vivid red of the carpet. She issued no statement, but a close friend confided to reporters that the weight of history had become unbearable. As the sun set over the White House, where President Joe Biden watched in strategic silence, the media exploded with speculation. Was this the end of the Trump era? Or just another chapter in his saga of improbable resurrections? What was unfolding was not mere political theater, but a meticulous deconstruction of an empire built on appeals, delays, and bravado. Trump, in his characteristic resilience, tweeted furiously about traitors in black robes, but the damage was done. The desertion began not with a bang, but with a series of doors closing softly, leaving him echoing alone in a hall empty of loyalty. Legal analysts, like Harvard professor Lawrence Tribe, commented on CNN panels that this decision represented a rare moment of self-preservation for the court, avoiding being seen as an appendage of Trumpism. They chose the longevity of the institution over gratitude to a nominator, Tribe said, as cameras captured the stunned faces of conservative commentators on Fox News. At the epicenter in Palm Beach, the remaining team gathered in emergency sessions, but the air was thick with distrust. Who would be next to fall? John Eastman, the academic who had architected the plan to subvert electoral certificates, was already signaling discontent in veiled interviews, suggesting that alternative strategies could be explored outside the Trump umbrella. Night fell over Washington with oppressive humidity, mirroring the cold sweat trickling down the backs of Trump's allies. The court's decision was not just a verdict, it was a watershed, forcing every team member to confront the reality that the Orange Man, with his iconic hair and clenched fists, might no longer be the knight-errant promising impossible victories. As reporters camped outside the Supreme Court, illuminated by spotlights that seemed accusatory, the world awaited the next move. But for Trump, the move had already happened, and it was devastating. Loyalty, that most precious commodity in politics, evaporated like smoke, leaving behind a vacuum that no speech could fill. In the following days, internal leaks would paint an even darker picture. Emails exchanged between Powell and Giuliani revealed old frustrations about limited resources and unfulfilled payment promises. "We're fighting a war with sticks and stones," Powell had written in a 2024 message, prophesying the collapse now materializing. Trump, in response, mobilized his disinformation machine, accusing the media of fabricating narratives, but even his most die-hard supporters began whispering doubts in online forums. The Supreme Court, once a bastion, had become the unlikely villain in this plot, and its decision echoed like a funeral bell for Trump's legal campaign. As the hours turned into dawn, Trump's phone rang non-stop, not with support, but with disguised resignation requests. The empire trembled, and the abandonment, inevitable, began to take shape in sharp lines against the night sky. With the dust from the Supreme Court's decision still hanging in the air, like a shroud over a fallen empire, the exodus from Trump's legal team gained the contours of a mass stampede, a spectacle blending Shakespearean drama with the raw desperation of a reality show spiraling toward cancellation. Sidney Powell wasn't alone in her departure. She served as the harbinger of a tidal wave that swept through the corridors of the Trump Organization like a Category 5 hurricane, leaving behind shredded documents and alliances fractured into irreparable shards. Rudy Giuliani, the man who once prowled the streets of New York as an unyielding sheriff, now found himself compelled to choose between blind loyalty and raw personal survival. In an impromptu press conference at a Midtown Manhattan hotel, his collar wilted and eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, Giuliani announced his resignation with words that sliced like razors. "I've given everything to this cause, but the court has made it abundantly clear that the battlefield has shifted, and I cannot, in good conscience, ask my colleagues to march down a path lined with poisoned thorns." His declaration, beamed live to a stunned audience, reverberated like a mercy shot to the heart of the Trumpian narrative of infallibility. Trump, watching from his Mar-a-Lago bunker, reportedly hurled the remote control against the wall, bellowing to unseen aides about rats deserting the sinking ship. Yet the reality cut deeper, more nuanced and merciless. Giuliani, drowning in debts exceeding $60 million from defamation lawsuits tied to his baseless election fraud claims, viewed his exit as a lifeline. His attorneys, in hushed private huddles, urged him to distance himself, lest the Trump collapse drag him into the abyss entirely. Meanwhile, Jenna Ellis, the attorney who had become the emblem of the MAGA movement's radicalized youth, chose a quieter farewell, dispatching her resignation letter via email at 3 a.m., invoking family reasons as a veil for what everyone knew to be unadulterated terror. Ellis, who had publicly confessed to lying about the prospects of overturning the 2020 election, now confronted the specter of being hauled as dead weight in any future appeals. And her departure signaled the close of an era for idealistic lawyers drawn to Trump's magnetic charisma. In the ensuing days, leaked audio from internal meetings unveiled the reigning pandemonium, raised voices clashing over vanishing fund allocations, mutual accusations of incompetence and betrayal flying like shrapnel. John Eastman, the constitutional theorist who had dreamed up an academic blueprint for a coup d'etat, was the next domino to topple. In an op-ed splashed across the Wall Street Journal, Eastman posited that the court's ruling demands a strategic recalibration that transcends personal loyalties, a polished euphemism for his impending resignation. His peers branded him an opportunist, but to Trump it stung as yet another dagger from an ally he had once dubbed a genius. The rout didn't halt there. Even peripheral figures, such as the patent lawyer handling minor intellectual property squabbles for the Trump Organization, started canceling appointments, wary of contagion by mere association. Political pundits, in endless loops of cable news dissections, unpacked the phenomenon as a textbook case in group psychology. What drives seasoned professionals to forsake a charismatic leader after years of fervent devotion? Insiders murmured that the answer lay in the icy finality of the Supreme Court's ruling, which not only dismantled immunity claims, but slapped tight deadlines on responses to pending cases, compelling attorneys to pick between ethical sanctions and bounced checks. In Washington, the American Bar Association's Ethics Committee convened in sealed sessions, hashing out whether to yank licenses from those clinging to tactics deemed frivolous. Trump, in a frantic bid for counterstrike, summoned a virtual huddle with billionaire donors, vowing to assemble the greatest legal team in history from scratch. But pledges trickled in sparingly, with figures like Elon Musk issuing cryptic nods to essential reforms. The media, insatiable as ever, churned out in-depth profiles of the defectors. Powell as the disillusioned evangelical crusader, Giuliani as the toppled titan, Ellis as the millennial scorched by the flames she had fanned. Meanwhile, in QAnon echo chambers, conspiracy vines sprouted wildly, pinning the blame on a deep state mole burrowed into the court. But the truth proved more mundane and ruinous. The coffers had run dry, morale had crumbled to dust, and the court had etched a line in the sand no one dared ford. Trump, marooned in his estates, fired off calls to long-lost contacts, even moderate Democrats, in frenzied hunts for replacements. But the lines rang hollow. The initial crack had morphed into a chasm, and the chorus of slamming doors composed the dirge for a campaign once deemed unstoppable. Come evening, in faceless Jersey hotels, former team members swapped bitter toasts, mourning not Trump's demise but the wreckage of their own careers, seduced by gilded vows that turned to ash. The Supreme Court's edict transcended mere judgment. It ignited an implosion, laying bare the rotten core of an edifice reared on quicksand. And as the autumn of 2025 yielded to winter's grip, the chill seeped not merely into the breeze, but into the souls of those who had sworn undying allegiance. The court's clarion call on immunity, absolute for core duties, presumptive for the rest, hadn't shielded Trump. It had exposed him, forcing his inner circle to reckon with a fortress no longer impregnable. Whispers among the remnants spoke of quiet negotiations with prosecutors. Immunity deals dangled like carrots to those willing to flip. One by one, the pillars buckled. A paralegal here, a consultant there, each exit chipping away at the facade of unity. Trump's war room, once buzzing with stratagems and bravado, now echoed with the hollow ring of unanswered emails. Pundits on MSNBC tallied the toll, dubbing it the Great Legal Unraveling, while Fox anchors spun tales of temporary retreats for a grander resurgence. But beneath the spin, the math was merciless. Without a phalanx of defenders, indictments loomed like guillotines, their blades honed by the court's own whetstone. In the shadowed alleys of D.C., law firms, headhunters fielded panicked queries from Trump loyalists seeking bolt holes, their resumes scrubbed of MAGA stains. The chasm widened, not just in personnel but in perception. Voters, scrolling feeds ablaze with defection headlines, began to peel away, trading fervent posts for furrowed brows. Trump's midnight rants on Truth Social railed against Judas lawyers, but the venom rang increasingly solitary, a monarch's soliloquy in an emptying throne room. As November's chill deepened, the first snowflakes dusted the Capitol dome, a poetic veil over the schism tearing at the republic's seams. The court's shadow loomed long, its immunity framework a double-edged sword that had cleaved Trump's armor while empowering his foes to strike unhindered. In boardrooms from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, executives weighed risks anew, their checkbooks snapping shut like bear traps. The fissures, born of that fateful bench decree, had indeed become chasms. Vast, yawning voids swallowing strategies, secrets, and the last vestiges of trust. And in the quiet aftermath, as Giuliani nursed a scotch in exile, and Powell penned her manifestos, Trump stared into the abyss, wondering if the roar he heard was the court's gavel, or the unraveling of his legacy entire. The storm had passed, but its tempests lingered, reshaping the political terrain into unfamiliar, unforgiving contours. When the dust finally settled over the rubble of Trump's legal fortress, what remained was a haunting vacuum, a silence so profound it drowned out even the echo of his once thunderous rallies. The Supreme Court's November 2025 ruling, delivered with the cold precision of a guillotine, had not merely rejected absolute immunity, it had detonated the myth of invincibility that had sustained Trump's empire for years. By early winter, the exodus was complete. Sidney Powell's podcast preached to a shrinking choir of true believers. Rudy Giuliani, bankrupt and broken, bartered his story for a ghost-written memoir that no major publisher touched. Jenna Ellis vanished into the anonymity of corporate law, her MAGA past scrubbed from LinkedIn like a bad tattoo. John Eastman's op-eds grew increasingly academic, detached, as if written by a man already testifying under oath in his sleep. In Mar-a-Lago's gilded halls, the war room lay dormant. Flat screens flickered with Fox News loops, but no strategists huddled over maps. The phones, once buzzing with donor pledges, rang only with debt collectors. Trump paced alone, dictating memos to a skeleton staff of interns who nodded vigorously while updating resumes. His Truth Social posts, once battle cries, now read like diary entries of a man arguing with ghosts. "They will regret this," he typed at 3:17 a.m. The caps lock a scream into the void. Prosecutors moved with predatory calm. In Georgia, Fani Willis scheduled depositions for February. In D.C., Jack Smith filed motions unopposed, the absence of counsel a gift-wrapped concession. Without Powell's Kraken filings, or Giuliani's courtroom theatrics, Trump's defenses collapsed like sandcastles at high tide. A federal judge, citing the Supreme Court's framework, green-lit discovery in the classified documents case. Subpoenas rained on Mar-a-Lago staff. One valet, offered immunity, detailed the night boxes were moved because the boss said so. The Republican Party, sensing blood, pivoted. Donors funneled millions to Ron DeSantis' shadow campaign. Mitch McConnell, in a rare public statement, called the court's decision a necessary correction. Even Trump's children distanced themselves. Ivanka declined comment. Don Jr. posted cryptic memes about loyalty tests. The base fractured. QAnon forums splintered into factions blaming the court, the lawyers, or Trump himself for not fighting hard enough. By Christmas 2025, Trump's legal calendar was a noose. Trials loomed in New York, hush money, Florida, documents, Georgia, election interference, and D.C., January 6th. Each required counsel, none materialized. A lone public defender, assigned after Trump's assets were frozen in a civil judgment, begged for continuances that judges denied with weary sighs. "Your client had years to prepare," one said. "The Supreme Court closed the door. I'm not reopening it." On New Year's Eve, Trump addressed a half-empty ballroom in Palm Beach. The crowd, once 10,000 strong, numbered fewer than 300. He promised the biggest comeback in history, but his voice cracked on biggest. Outside, protesters chanted not in rage, but in pity. The man who had bent reality to his will now bent only to it. The void was total. No lawyers, no strategy, no shield. The Supreme Court's gavel had not just struck a case, it had struck a dynasty. In the quiet that followed, America heard the sound of an era ending. Not with a bang, not with a tweet, but with the soft click of a courtroom door closing on a man alone with his consequences.